the book, A Dharmic Social History of India, it aims to document a particular narrative of history that has been neglected either intentionally or because of ignorance, cultural ignorance, or because of some vested interest. We do not know. We do not want to impute any reasons for that. But the point is, there is a particular flow of Indian social history, a core dimension of Indian social history that has been neglected by the dominant narratives of social sciences. We want to look into that. However, this particular aspect of social history has been observed by certain important pioneers. They have pointed it out. Still, when in post-independent India, a particular class of anthropologists, social sciences people, they started working on Indian society, they somehow wanted to not even look into it or try to false fit the data into their favorite theories. So, now this book, what it does is, it tells there are other frameworks, better frameworks, more holistic frameworks to look into Indian social history. Start from the beginnings. Let us take the Harappan Civilization, for example. In the case of Harappan Civilization, which some people insist on calling only as Indus Valley Civilization, there are others, based on modern researchers, they call it Sindhu Saraswati Civilization. So, for the sake of uniformity, we are sticking on to the Harappan Civilization. So, Harappan Civilization, what is the peculiar aspect of Harappan Civilization? One is that it never had such imposing structures of power. Like, for example, the pyramids, like the palaces, imposing palaces of Mesopotamia, Babylon. They didn't have that. The structures you see are decentralized structures. They are not very imposing, but at the same time, the geographical coverage of Harappan civilization was really, really vast. So Harappan civilization was geographically vast, much vaster than any other Bronze Age civilization. The second aspect, it has endured more years. In fact, around 3,000 years to 2,500 years. It has survived without any centralized exhibition of extreme ruling power. So how did this manage to do this? A lot of sociologists have looked into it, and there have been a lot of arguments. But there is an evolving consensus. That evolving consensus is about a society that was actually having a lot of occupational groups. And these occupational groups are quasi-hereditary, very similar to the jatis. Probably they had a Varna system also, because Airavata Mahadevan, one of the persons who tried to decipher Indus seal, Indus signs, he points out that there are hereditary officers with priestly function, hereditary officers with functions of a soldier, army, military. Then there are hereditary officers, and there are ordinary people. There are tillers, plovers, they formed a particular group. So in all this, what we are seeing is that there is a kind of a fourfold social structure, very similar to Varna. So, Jonathan Canoyer, one of the archaeologists, most prominent Harappan archaeologists, he points out in a paper that the data sets that come from any South Asian settlement, habitation, South Asian village, South Asian archaeological excavations into the classical era, which shows very clearly the jati structures and the kind of jati-based material, archaeological materials that you get. That data set is very similar to the data set that you are getting from Harappa. So you have this social structure that had actually made sure that the Harappan civilization survived. So how did this Harappan civilization survive for this long time over this vast area without a ruler? It was because of this network of occupational hereditary groups that came together and they worked. And what is at the center of this? So here we can tell that one important thing that the consensus says is that they had some kind of a Jajmani system. What is the Jajmani system? Etymologically, it is related to yajna. So if you are doing your work as a yajna, you become the person who does the yajna. And there is a participatory wealth creation and wealth distribution. That is the yajna model. This yajna model, which needs, in a way, a very high philosophy like that of Bhagavad Gita, but it has been democratized and it has spread over all the villages and it has helped the villages to sustain themselves. That is a very important thing. It has helped the villagers to sustain themselves. Right? So, this Jajmani system, it has its roots in yajna. Yajna is a Vedic ritual and it is central. It is not only a ritual. This is basic social archetype of the Indian civilization, where there is participatory wealth creation. Now think about this, what it does to this. Every trade, every occupation. Consider you are a plower. When you are plowing the way, you are a farmer. Consider you are a farmer. When you are plowing the field, what happens is that the plowing becomes a yajna, then you becomes the person who does the yajna. So in this, what happens is that the person becomes an equivalent of a Brahmin who is conducting the yajna, the Purohita who is conducting the yajna. Now, this makes your work sacred. Whether you are a farmer, whether you are a woodcutter, whether you are a carpenter, whether you are a barber, this work becomes sacred. Now, the Jajmani system itself was identified and then it was taken into the modern sociology by a foreigner, a missionary. He identified only negative features in the Jajmani system. He said that the Jajmani system actually helps only the upper caste and it is actually keeping the so-called lower caste in a very subjugated way. But if you look into the Jajmani system itself, there is no proof for that. There is no proof for that. And when you see another one person has also studied the Jajmani system and he has provided a framework. That was Mahatma Gandhi. When he was in Yerwada jail, he was writing about this particular system, how every person, he gives solid examples. He gives solid examples of a barber and an ordinary person who is considering his work as a yajna. And he is contributing to the society. The spirit of yajna is present in ordinary village people. Mahatma Gandhi highlights this. Now, if we look at our own Indian academia, you will find that they follow that particular missionary who said about the Jajmani system in a negative way. But they don't follow the model that Gandhiji advocated. And Gandhiji advocated it not because he had any agenda, he advocated it because of his experience of the society. Whereas on the other side, you have a theory that a pagan society, a Hindu society, it had to be kind of unethical in its social system. Based on that, the Jajmani system is presented there. And our academia, they rather go by the missionary than by Mahatma Gandhi. This is a very interesting thing that this particular book highlights. And another important aspect of this book is that it talks about Bhakti. Bhakti is present already in the Vedas. And Bhakti is what? It is a sadhana of the individual. It is an individual who increases in empathy because of Bhakti. And this phenomenon naturally becomes a force for social emancipation. Now, if you take any society, in that society, there will be forces of social subjugation, social stagnation. There will also be forces of social emancipation. It is common for all the societies. whether it's the Western society, Indian society, African society, it is common for all the societies. But in India, an important aspect is that the social emancipation for the other countries, for other civilizations, particularly the Western civilization, the emancipation comes when the society can afford it. For example, you think about the abolition of slavery. The abolition of slavery happened when the slavery was not exactly economical. Yeah, indentured labor would have been better economical for them, then they went for the indentured labor. And the indentured laborer system, they said that it is, they started justifying it. Okay, so if you look at the Western society, it fights the social evil when it can afford to fight the social evil in a socio-economic terms or in terms of their strategic interests. In the case of India, the social emancipation happens irrespective of the socio-economic conditions. It comes from the spiritual, individual self-expansion. So, Bhakti becomes a very potent tool for social emancipation, but that is not the be-all and end-all of Bhakti. Bhakti doesn't care about social emancipation or social stagnation, but the very movement of the Bhakti naturally generates social emancipation. So this is the phenomenon that we have to study. Every Bhakti saint has created a situation where social emancipation naturally happens. What happens in Indian sociology is that, or even in the general Indian media perception is that, they reverse this and they tell that it is the social emancipation that made Bhakti a tool. This is not so. It is the self-expansion that made social emancipation possible. So the Bhakti is the core, the social emancipation is the result. And this aspect of the society has been reverberating again and again, and there are many examples that have been given in this. There is another one very interesting aspect that the book tells, which can be controversial. Buddhism and Jainism, they were strong moralist religions. Because they were moralist religions, they naturally saw certain occupations as defiled. For example, a religion that advocates complete non-violence, how will it look at a butcher? At the same time, think about the pragmatic needs of the society. The society needs strong warriors. The warriors need to be fed with meat. So you have to have butchers, you have to have hunters. Now, how do I explain that? If ahimsa is the universal strong moralistic principle, and if the society needs to have warriors and kings and military, how do I explain it? If it needs to have hunters, butchers, how do I explain it? I explain by telling the hunters, the butchers, they were all born in that particular jati because of their past karma. That is how the concept of karma became a tool to justify social hierarchy, social exclusion, social aristocracy. Naturally, that is the other side of the coin. If because of karma, I am born as a butcher, because of karma, I am born in a priestly family. Because of karma, I am born as a king. Because of karma, I am born as a wealthy trader who can be a vegetarian, who can afford to be a vegetarian, right? And the butcher, the hunter, they are butchers and hunters because they have done some bad karma, so they are born like that. So karma came to justify the social hierarchy, social exclusion, etc. because of Jainism and Buddhism. Because there is also another one evidence. It is in the Buddhist literature that you first come across, most probably in my knowledge, so I have put it in the book, that there are higher jatis and there are lower jatis. Before that, it was not done. You take, for example, but was social stratification and social exclusion there in the society? Definitely they were there. Definitely they were there. There is the famous story of Kavasra in Rig Veda, and later it is told in Aitreya Brahmana. Okay, so what happens is that there is this big drought. They are doing this yajna to bring the waters. So the people have joined, the great rishis are sitting there. There is also the Kavajaka was also sitting there. Okay, and one of the rishis looks at him and tells, "Oh, is this guy not a son of a woman who is serving the gamblers' lodges and dens, let us throw him out. Because he is not a Brahmana, he is a Brahmana. Throw him out. So they are throwing him out. So in that agony, in that humiliation, suddenly he becomes mantra drishta. And when he becomes mantra drishta and mantras come out of his mouth, naturally the Saraswati starts flowing around. Okay, so here you see that the Vedic society and Vedic values have to be differentiated. The Vedic society was like any other society that had social stratification, that had social exclusion. Vedic values did not condone that. Vedic values said, don't exclude a person because of birth. The person can become a mantra dishcha. And now, every time water is taken, those verses are told. Those verses are told. What is the meaning of that? It means that Vedas reject social exclusion. Then you have a clear idea now that the Vedic religion, though there was social stratification in the Vedic society, opposed the social stratification. Whereas the Buddhist and Jain worldviews, they provided the conceptual space where karma can be used to justify social stratification and social exclusion. Then comes the role of Bhagavad Gita and Bhakti, which again emphasized that the social exclusion, social stratification, they can be reversed. They can be transcended with the help of Bhakti and with the help of Karma Yoga. So, when the butcher's work becomes sacred, the butcher is doing a yajna. This is a concept that you cannot have in Jainism. This is a concept you cannot have in Buddhism. In Hinduism, you can have this concept. In Vedic religion, you can have this concept. The Vedic religion says, a butcher cutting the goats and taking the flesh and selling it, he is actually doing his yajna. So, in a way, ideational way, the butcher becomes the equivalent of the Brahmana. The work he is doing becomes equivalent of a yajna. So, you cannot tell that you have to be excluded. Because he is doing his work, he is needed for the society. So, this yajna model was again brought, and this was brought forcefully by Bhagavad Gita. So, Bhagavad Gita very clearly says that a person, irrespective of his birth, even those births that social reality at that time, they thought that the women and the Shudra and the Vaishya, they were not fit for enlightenment. Why? Because if you look at the Buddhist literature, you will get the answer. The Bodhisattva or the Buddha would be born initially, literally in the Brahmana, the Kshatriya. Later only they modified it to include Vaishya and others. And that would have been because of the influence of Hinduism. Now this is completely reversal of what you have learned. You have learned that Buddhism was the reformist movement of a caste-ridden Hinduism. But the book says, this book, what it argues is that Buddhism was the reason, Jainism was the reason why India became this caste-ridden society. And we are not telling that they were the sole reason, but they were the most dominant reason. Not exactly the Buddhism and Jainism as such, because the aspects in Buddhism and Jainism, they provided the conceptual space to use karma to justify birth-based stratification and exclusion. And this was opposed by Bhakti movement. The entire Bhakti movement should be seen in this particular context. So you will find in Nayanmars, you have the hunter, Kannappa Nayanar. You have Adibhakta Nayanar, who was actually a fisherman. And all these people are celebrated. These people have equal status in terms of enlightenment with others. If you go to a Shiva temple in South India, you will find this. Okay. So, this particular aspect of social equality was created automatically, spontaneously by the Bhakti movement. This extends. This extends even into the freedom movement, after the freedom movement. For example, in the temple entry movement, it was the Hari Bhakti that helped the temple entry movement to succeed. And the book also shows, usually it is argued that there is fatalism in Indian society, and because of fatalism, they have only parihara. But actually, the book shows that there is a, because of the karma concept, there is a proactive way in which the entrepreneurs have been working for the elevation of the society. So, all in all, the book argues for a new paradigm. The book argues for a new framework through which you should look at in Indian society, Indian social history, and how the dynamics operates in Indian social history, and how you cannot essentialize Indian social history or Hinduism with only jati.